Chapter 1. The Factory Worker. The hum of the press line was a constant, low thunder that you felt more in your bones than in your ears. The floor vibrated with each hydraulic punch, the air thick with the scent of hot metal and machine oil. David Matthysse had worked at this plant for almost a decade, long enough for the noise to fade into the background like a second heartbeat. He stood at his station, leather gloves creaking as he fed sheet metal into the jaws of the press. The machine slammed down, flattening the steel with brutal precision, then rose again, hissing like a creature catching its breath before the next strike. He'd done this movement so many times that his hands moved on muscle memory, his eyes wandering toward the clock mounted on the far wall. Still another hour before break. At 42, David looked like what he wanted the world to believe he was, just another tired factory man. His shoulders were broad from years of manual labor, his face weathered and lined, dark hair flecked with gray. He didn't talk much at work. That suited most of the crew fine. Factory friendships tended to burn out quick under the constant grind. "Hey, Dave," called Ken from the next station, raising his voice over the pounding metal. "They say the new guy quit already." David gave a small nod. "Can't blame him." Ken laughed and turned back to his machine. Conversations here were always short. No one wanted to miss a beat and get a finger caught in the press. When the lunch bell finally rang, David stripped off his gloves, his fingers stiff and tingling from the vibration. He crossed the plant floor, weaving past forklifts and pallets of raw steel. The locker room smelled faintly of soap and sweat, the clatter of metal lunch pails echoing against the tile. David spun the combination on his locker, the metal door swinging open with a groan. Inside was his jacket, a thermos, and a pair of worn work boots. As he pulled off his coveralls, the sleeve of his undershirt rode up, revealing a faded tattoo on his forearm, a stylized raven with spread wings and a string of numbers beneath it. A couple of the younger guys glanced his way, but didn't ask. Nobody ever did. It wasn't the kind of tattoo you got for fun, and something in David's manner told people it was better not to pry. He changed into a fresh shirt and headed toward the break area, where a few men were gathered around a vending machine, shaking it in frustration. David poured coffee from the communal pot into his thermos cup. Bitter lukewarm, but it was coffee. The afternoon passed in the same steady rhythm. Feed the press, clear the product, stack the output. He clocked out at 5 sharp, stepping into the cool evening air. The sun was dipping behind the smokestacks, casting the plant in long shadows. David's pickup sat alone in the far corner of the lot. He preferred parking away from the others, old habits from another life. He slid behind the wheel, turned the ignition, and let the radio play quietly as he drove home through the narrow back streets. His house was a modest 2-story on the edge of town, the paint a little faded, the lawn trimmed more out of duty than pride. Linda's car was already in the driveway. When he walked inside, the smell of dinner wasn't there. No clatter from the kitchen. Instead, Linda was perched on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a half-finished glass of wine on the coffee table. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Shift ended at the usual time," David replied, setting his lunch pail on the counter. "Traffic," she hummed noncommittally. There was a time when she would have looked up, smiled, maybe asked how his day was. That time was gone. Now, her tone was clipped, her eyes on something else, always something else. He washed up at the sink, the water running warm over his hands. "You eat already?" "Not hungry," she said. "I'm meeting some friends later." David glanced over. "Which friends?" "Just friends," she said quickly, standing and grabbing her purse. "Don't wait up." She was out the door before he could respond, heels clicking on the walkway. He stood there a moment longer, staring at the closed door, then turned off the faucet. This had been happening for months now, late nights, vague answers, the smell of perfume when she came home that didn't belong to her usual brand. He'd said nothing so far, not because he didn't notice, but because he was waiting. After reheating leftovers and eating alone, David sat at the kitchen table with the day's mail, sorting through bills and junk. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an email from HR about mandatory overtime next week. He deleted it without reading the details. Later, he headed upstairs to change for bed. The window in their bedroom was open, letting in the faint sound of a passing car. He was just pulling his shirt over his head when he heard it, Linda's voice downstairs. Soft hushed. He froze. The floorboards creaked as he moved silently toward the top of the stairs. The house was dim, lit only by the warm glow from the kitchen. He stayed in the shadow of the hallway, listening. Yeah, I told him I'd be out with the girls, Linda was saying, her voice low but tinged with laughter. No, he didn't suspect a thing. A man's voice answered, muffled through the phone speaker, but unmistakable. Ryan Thompson. David knew him from the plant. Ryan was the plant manager, smooth-talking, always wearing a grin like he owned the place. Linda laughed again, the sound sharp in the quiet house. You're terrible, she said. But, yeah, later sounds perfect. David's jaw tightened. He stayed in the shadows, silent. The words weren't enough to hang her yet, but the tone, the secrecy, the fact she was talking to Ryan at all, it all slid into place in his mind like a puzzle he'd been avoiding putting together. After a few more minutes, she ended the call. The clink of the wine glass followed, then the click of her heels toward the door. David remained still until he heard her car start and pull away. Only then did he step out of the shadows, his expression unreadable. He moved to the kitchen, saw the lipstick print on the rim of her glass, and the faint smell of her perfume lingering in the air. He picked up the glass, studied it for a long moment, then set it down exactly where it had been. In the silence of the empty house, the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. David stood there, motionless, his eyes on nothing, his mind somewhere far away. The tattoo on his forearm itched faintly under his sleeve. Chapter 2, The Murder Plan. The morning started like any other, machines groaning to life, the smell of grease and burnt steel hanging in the air, the low murmur of men settling into another day at the factory. David clocked in early, as usual. Punctuality was habit, not necessity. In another life, being late had meant more than just a write-up. He was halfway through his shift when the plant's floor supervisor, Mick, waved him over. Hey, Dave, Ryan wants to see you in his office. Something about the new press calibration. David wiped his hands on a rag and gave a slow nod. He didn't much care for Ryan Thompson. The man was all slick smiles and self-importance. The type who'd never dirted his hands on the line, but strutted through the plant like a king inspecting his kingdom. The stairs to the office level were steel and narrow, each step echoing up into the glass-walled hallway. Ryan's office was at the far end. The door was closed, but the blinds were half open. David was about to knock when he heard it, Linda's voice. He froze. I'm telling you, he's too stubborn to quit, Linda said, her tone almost playful. A low chuckle followed, Ryan's. Then we'll make him quit breathing. David's hand stayed on the doorknob, but he didn't turn it. Instead, he eased back a step, angling himself just outside the line of sight from the window. Inside, chairs scraped against the floor. Linda's perfume drifted faintly through the crack in the door, mingling with the scent of Ryan's cologne. David could see the back of her head through the blinds. She was sitting close to him, legs crossed, leaning forward like they were discussing the weather instead of murder. Ryan's voice came again, dripping with sarcasm. Hell, we could just send him to the industrial press. One slip, and he made a crunching noise with his teeth. Cleanup's easier than paperwork. Linda laughed, not even trying to hide it. Oh, please. You'd mess that up. 2 in the head, Ryan. That way there's no chance. And no one questions a workplace accident if he's already, she trailed off, but her meaning was clear. Ryan grinned. You've got a mean streak, you know that. David's pulse should have spiked. His breathing should have quickened. But instead, something else slid into place inside him, cold, familiar, dangerous. It was like flipping a switch he'd promised himself he'd never touch again. The part of him that was Echo 77 was suddenly awake. He stepped silently back down the hall, as if he'd taken the wrong turn. Down the stairs, past the whirring machines, back to his station. He picked up where he'd left off, his movements steady, precise. To anyone watching, David Matthysse was just another worker punching his hours. Inside, he was running a silent inventory, entry points, escape routes, angles of visibility in Ryan's office. An hour later, Mick wandered by again. Ryan said you two connected? David shrugged. Must have been a mix-up. Didn't see him. The rest of the day passed in a haze of noise and movement. David kept his head down, but his ears stayed open. He caught snippets. Ryan on the phone, Linda's name mentioned twice. Nothing incriminating, but enough to tighten the knot in his gut. When the final buzzer sounded, David moved with the flow of workers toward the locker room. As he changed out of his coveralls, one of the younger guys joked about drinks at O'Malley's. David shook his head. Not tonight. He waited until most of the men had cleared out before leaving the plant. Ryan's office light was still on, visible from the parking lot. Through the glass wall, David saw Ryan pacing, phone in hand, grinning like a man who thought he had everything under control. David didn't give him a second glance. He walked to his truck, got in, and drove away, taking a route that didn't lead straight home. The sun had set by the time he reached the edge of town. He parked on a side street 2 blocks from a building with familiar lights in the windows, Ryan's. He'd done this kind of thing before, though back then the targets hadn't been plant managers or cheating wives. David sat in the dark cab, watching. The house had 2 floors, one entry at the front, a side gate leading to the backyard. From this angle, he could see straight into the living room when the curtains shifted. At 8:15, Linda's car pulled into the driveway. She got out, wearing the same dress she'd worn to the plant earlier, too expensive for a casual visit, too fitted for innocence. She didn't knock. She went straight in. David's fingers tapped lightly on the steering wheel. His breathing stayed slow. The old instincts were whispering angles, timing lines of fire, but he shoved them back. This wasn't the moment. Not yet. A light came on upstairs. Shadows moved across the blinds. Laughter filtered faintly through the quiet night when the front door opened for a moment, then shut again. David made a mental note of the timeline. Linda had arrived at 8:15. The upstairs light had gone on at 8:19. He stayed there another 30 minutes, watching. The lights shifted from room to room, kitchen, living, upstairs again. Every detail was stored away, precise and neat. He didn't take notes. He didn't need to. At 9:03, Linda left. Ryan didn't walk her to the car. She drove away, heading toward the main road that led back to their neighborhood. David waited 2 more minutes, then started his truck. He didn't follow her. He already knew where she was going. Back at his own house, the driveway was empty. Linda hadn't arrived yet. David stepped inside, the darkened rooms greeting him like old friends. He locked the door, went straight upstairs, and changed into black jeans and a dark shirt. From the closet, he pulled down a small, nondescript box from the top shelf. Inside were items no one would expect a factory worker to own: a compact digital camera with a telephoto lens, a set of wireless mics, a burner phone, and a GPS tracker small enough to hide in the curve of a key fob. He set them on the bed one by one, the motions methodical. There was no hesitation in his hands now. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway reached him. He closed the box, returned it to the closet, and went downstairs. Linda came in, her face flushed, hair slightly mussed. She smiled faintly, as if expecting him to ask where she'd been. "Working late," she said casually. David gave a slow nod. Something like that. She didn't press. She poured herself another glass of wine, the scent sharp in the air. "I'm going to bed early." "Sure." He watched her walk upstairs, her heels tapping lightly on the wood. When the bedroom door closed, David stepped into the kitchen, leaning on the counter. His reflection in the dark window looked back at him. Not just David Matthysse, the factory worker, but someone older, harder. Someone who had survived places far worse than this. The cold part of him was fully awake now. Tonight was reconnaissance. Tomorrow would be something else entirely. Chapter 3, Echo 77 Wakes. The dream came again that night. A black jungle under a moonless sky. The stink of wet earth and cordite. The weight of a suppressed rifle snug against his shoulder. He moved through the undergrowth without a sound, the faint green glow of his night vision slicing the dark into shades of ghostly light. Echo 77, you are green. Repeat, you are green, came the whisper over calms. He remembered the way his heart never sped up, never raced, no matter how close the danger. Echo 77 had no room for panic, only timing. 2 centuries ahead, talking in low tones beside a corrugated metal hut. David had closed the distance in 12 seconds. One quick twist of a garrote, the other silence with a double tap before the first body hit the mud. He didn't stop to look. He slipped inside the hut, pulling a bound hostage, an intelligence asset, out into the night. The evac chopper waited 3 clicks north, but they had 5 minutes before the next patrol. He carried the man half the way, his rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning for movement. The op had gone down exactly as planned. They always did back then. That's why the name Echo 77 had meant something in certain circles, the kind of name that made enemies think twice and allies stand a little straighter. But those days, they were gone. David woke before dawn, the dreams still sharp in his mind. He lay staring at the ceiling for a long moment before swinging his legs out of bed. Linda's side was empty. Not unusual these days. He showered, dressed, and went downstairs. On the kitchen table sat the box he'd pulled out the night before. This time, he opened it without hesitation. The camera was a compact black model with a lens that could read a license plate at a quarter mile. He checked the battery, the storage card, the zoom function. All good. Next came the wireless mics, slim, adhesive-backed units he could plant on almost any surface. Range, about 200 feet. By the time the morning sun filtered through the blinds, he was ready. That evening, David waited in his truck outside the plant, engine off, lights down. He'd chosen a spot with a clear view of Ryan's office windows. The upper floor was lit, but the blinds were only half closed. He watched the lot empty, workers drifting to their cars in 2s and 3s. At 6.42, Linda's car rolled in. She didn't park near the main entrance. She drove around back, where the management lot was. David's hands moved automatically. The telephoto lens slid into place, the focus adjusted until the office window filled the viewfinder. Ryan stood inside, leaning on his desk, grinning like a cat. Linda closed the door behind her. Through the glass, David couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Not yet. The body language told enough. She was relaxed, leaning in close. Ryan's hand brushed her arm. She didn't move away. David set the camera down and reached for the second piece of the plan. Earlier that day, during his lunch break, he'd taken a detour past the management floor on the pretext of looking for a misplaced shipment manifest. In reality, he planted a wireless mic under the lip of Ryan's desk. Now, the feed hummed in his earpiece. The voices came through crisp. "Vincent says it'll clear by the end of the month," Ryan was saying. "Good," Linda replied. "The last thing we need is more delays. He's not going to wait forever." "Relax," Ryan said, chuckling. "Once the shipment moves, we're clear. No one's going to tie us to it." David's jaw flexed. He knew that name, Vincent Castellano. In his Echo 77 days, Castellano had been a ghost in intelligence files. A mob-connected broker who supplied arms to whoever had the money, from cartel lieutenants to warlords in failed states. He'd never been caught, never been photographed in the act. But he was real. And if Linda was talking about shipments with Ryan under Castellano's name, this was more than adultery. Linda's voice came again, quieter now. "And David, he's not stupid. He's watching me." Ryan laughed. "Let him. Won't matter soon. We just need him to walk into the right spot at the right time." "Crushed in the press," Linda said. David could almost see the smile on her lips. Then, two in the head. "No mistakes." Ryan's chair creaked. "You're cold, you know that." "I'm practical," she answered. "Vincent doesn't like loose ends." There was a pause. Ryan poured drinks. David could hear the clink of glass. Then their voices dropped to murmurs, the mic catching only fragments. "Shipment out of Newark, suppressors in crate 3, payoff cleared to offshore." David sat motionless, absorbing every word. His breathing was even, his expression flat. On the surface, he could have been a man listening to the weather. Inside, the cold calculation of Echo 77 was already mapping connections. He let the conversation run another 15 minutes before shutting off the recorder. Enough for tonight. He didn't drive straight home. Instead, he circled the industrial district, thinking. Castellano's name changed the game. Ryan wasn't just an arrogant plant manager. He was connected to an international arms pipeline. Linda wasn't just cheating. She was an asset in a criminal network. one that had clearly decided David Matthysse' life was expendable. He remembered the day he'd walked away from the Black Ops world. No ceremony, no medal, no farewell party, just a signed non-disclosure agreement and a quiet handshake from a handler who never used his real name. "You're good, Echo," the man had said. "Too good. But no one stays lucky forever. Get out while you can." David had taken that advice. He'd buried the gear, locked away the habits, and let the years turn Echo 77 into nothing more than a shadow in his own memory. Until now, by the time he pulled into his driveway, the decision was already made. He was going to dig, quietly, methodically, and when the time came, he'd be ready. That night, when Linda finally came home, she found David in the living room, reading the paper, a cup of coffee steaming beside him. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Hey, long day." She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, you. Same." She went upstairs without another word. When she was out of earshot, David reached under the coffee table and pulled out the recorder. The blinking red light told him the file had saved perfectly. Vincent Castellano. Armed shipments. An accident and 2 in the head. Echo 77 was awake again. Chapter 4. The Industrial Press Trap. The factory smelled sharper than usual that night. A mix of hot oil, burned metal, and something faintly acrid that clung to the air. David stepped through the employee entrance at 9.15, swiping his badge without hesitation. His boots echoed against the concrete floor as he made his way toward the locker room. He already knew tonight was the night. The conversation he'd recorded the evening before had been explicit enough to remove any doubt. The timing, the method, the casual cruelty, it had all been laid out between sips of expensive liquor in Ryan's office. David's name had been stamped with an expiration date. He moved through the plant with the same unhurried pace as any other night shift. To anyone watching, he was just another man starting his overtime hours. Inside, every sense was active, scanning for the slightest shift in pattern. From the elevated walkway above the main floor, Ryan's figure appeared, hands in his pockets, the glow of his office light behind him. He spotted David and raised a hand in a mock-friendly wave before descending the stairs. "Dave!" Ryan's voice was too loud, too cheerful. "Got a quick thing I need your help with before you start your shift." David wiped his palms on his gloves. "What kind of thing?" "Press alignment," Ryan said, smiling like it was an inside joke. "We've been having some calibration issues. Thought you'd be the perfect guy to eyeball it." They walked together toward Press 6, the largest hydraulic press in the plant, capable of flattening an engine block in a single motion. Its piston arm gleamed under the overhead lights. The safety cage retracted for maintenance. David's eyes flicked toward the shadows behind a stack of sheet metal crates. Movement. Just a flicker, but enough. He filed it away without breaking stride. "Machine's been finicky all week," Ryan went on, gesturing toward the press bed. "Stand right here, and I'll run a test cycle." David crouched, pretending to inspect the press plate. "Looks clean enough. You replaced the hydraulic seals." Ryan grinned. "Nah, just want to see if it's aligned." "Step in closer, right there, so you can look straight up the—" David straightened and stepped forward, but not into the spot Ryan indicated. Instead, he took one step to the side, letting his body angle just enough to glance past the crates. The shooter was there, short-barreled pistol in hand, eyes locked on where David was supposed to stand. David moved. His hand shot out, grabbing the edge of the control lever for the press and slamming it down. The massive piston arm dropped with a roar, smashing into the steel plate with bone-rattling force. The shooter flinched at the sudden noise, and that was all David needed. He kicked the crate stack with a single hard shove. It toppled like a wave of metal sheets, the corner of one crate slamming into the shooter's arm. The gun went clattering across the floor. Ryan swore, stepping back. "What the hell?" David didn't answer. He vaulted over the fallen crate, grabbing the shooter by the collar and slamming him face first into the concrete. The man groaned, struggling, but David pinned him with a knee between the shoulder blades. From the corner of his vision, Ryan was edging toward the control panel. David's voice came sharp and cold. "Don't." Ryan froze. The look in David's eyes wasn't the look of a tired factory worker. The commotion had already drawn attention. Two line workers approached, eyes wide. "Call security," David ordered, "and tell them to bring the cops." Ryan forced a chuckle, his voice shaking just slightly. "Jesus, Dave, you're overreacting." David reached into the shooter's jacket and pulled out a suppressed pistol. He held it up for the others to see. "Overreacting." The color drained from Ryan's face. Minutes later, plant security arrived, followed by two uniformed officers. They took the shooter into custody, cuffing him and leading him toward the exit. David handed over the pistol carefully, making sure the officers noted the suppressor. Ryan tried to regain his swagger. "This is insane. I don't know this guy." David reached into his pocket and produced a small digital recorder. He pressed play, crushed in the press, then two in the head. No mistakes. Linda's voice filled the space. Then Ryan's laugh. The officers exchanged glances. "You'll both need to come with us," one said, nodding toward Ryan. Outside in the parking lot, the flashing blue lights painted the factory walls in rhythmic pulses. David stood off to the side, hands in his jacket pockets, watching as Ryan was handcuffed and led to a patrol car. Linda arrived 10 minutes later, hair disheveled, eyes wide in a practiced show of concern. "David, what's going on?" "Ask your boyfriend," David said flatly, jerking his chin toward Ryan. She turned to the officers. "This is ridiculous. You can't—" The female officer cut her off. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us as well. You've been named in a criminal conspiracy." Linda's mask cracked for just a heartbeat, shock, then anger, before she composed herself and lifted her chin. "Fine, but you're making a mistake." David said nothing. He watched them drive away, the patrol cars shrinking into the night. By the time he returned inside, the plant was buzzing with speculation. Workers clustered in small groups, whispering about guns, cops, and whatever the hell had just gone down. Mick, the floor supervisor, shook his head as David passed. "What the hell did you get yourself into?" David gave a small shrug. "Maintenance issue." In the locker room, he washed the oil from his hands, the cold water biting against his skin. He studied his reflection in the mirror, calm, steady, unreadable. The night had gone exactly as he'd intended. But deep down, he knew this was just the opening move. Arrests didn't mean convictions. And with a man like Vincent Castellano in the shadows, nothing was going to be that simple. For now, he had evidence. Enough to shake the ground under them. Enough to make them react. And when they did, he'd be ready. Chapter 5, Deeper Than Betrayal. The factory floor felt different after the arrests. Quieter, edgier, as if the air carried a charge no one could see. Whispers traveled faster than the conveyor belts, but David didn't feed them. He kept his head down, finished his shifts, and waited for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. 3 days after the night of the press incident, he got the call. Not from the police, not from a lawyer, just Mick, standing at the break room doorway, with an expression somewhere between disbelief and disgust. "They're out," Mick said flatly. David looked up from his coffee. "Ooh, your wife and Ryan walked out of county jail this morning. Charges dropped." David stared at him for a long moment, letting the words settle. "Dropped," he repeated, his voice neutral. "Yeah, guess the DA lacked sufficient evidence." Mick made air quotes. "You believe that?" David didn't answer. He didn't need to. Inside, something clicked into place, not anger, not surprise, but confirmation. That night, after leaving work, David didn't go home. He drove to a dingy 24-hour laundromat on the edge of town where the neon sign buzzed faintly in the dark. Inside, amid the smell of detergent and humming dryers, he opened his battered laptop and began to dig. Not on Google, not on the normal internet. His hands moved with old precision, calling up encrypted gateways, anonymous search tunnels, buried archives. Ghost pathways from a life he'd buried. Linda's arrest record was already sealed. Ryan's too. Both files flagged with the same internal marker. OAE clearance override. David sat back in the hard plastic chair, frowning. OAE, Office of Advanced Engagement. He'd heard that acronym once, years ago, whispered in a safe house briefing. It wasn't a law enforcement unit. It was something darker. Hours slipped away in a blur of data streams, unlisted personnel rosters, and heavily redacted operational memos. A pattern began to form, faint at first, then undeniable. Over the last decade, several ex-Echo operatives, men and women David had served with, had died in accidents or under mysterious circumstances. Plane crashes, car fires, suicides that didn't match the profiles. In at least half of those cases, there was a common factor: the spouse, wives or husbands who'd appeared out of nowhere after the operative retired. No shared history before marriage, no family connections, no real paper trail until the day the vows were exchanged. He clicked through one file. Marcus Halverson, Echo 12. Dead in a boating accident 3 years ago. Wife survived. She'd married Marcus just 18 months before the accident. Her prior life? A single line in the file. Identity restructured under Project Hearthstone. David froze. Project Hearthstone. The memory hit him like a round to the chest. A classified program rumored in Black Ops circles, a way to neutralize problem assets without open conflict. Infiltrate their personal lives. Gain trust. Wait for the moment. Then eliminate. And it wasn't just random. These were targeted extractions. A clean kill with a familiar face holding the knife. David leaned back, staring at the laundromat's flickering ceiling light. His marriage to Linda, every smile, every fight, every shared moment flashed through his mind. The night they'd met at the bar downtown. She'd accidentally spilled a drink on him. The quick laugh. The way she'd leaned in too close. Her questions about his past. He chalked it up to attraction. It hadn't been. It had been an assignment. He pulled up Linda's background file, or rather, the gaps in it. No digital footprint before the age of 24. No school records. No credit history. Everything that should have existed was missing, replaced with a fabricated identity. Her wedding vows to him had been written into her mission parameters. David felt the air in his chest grow heavy. Not because of heartbreak, that wound had cauterized itself weeks ago, but because of what it meant. Linda wasn't a rogue player. She was part of a network. And if they'd come after him, it meant someone far higher up the food chain had signed the order. His burner phone buzzed. An encrypted message appeared, no sender ID. Just coordinates. He recognized them instantly. An old Echo safe house, long abandoned. The message vanished after 10 seconds. David closed the laptop. Whoever had sent that knew he was digging. The next day, he took a calculated risk and drove out to the safe house. The building was a rotting farmhouse set back from the road, its paint peeling in the summer heat. Inside, the air smelled of dust and mildew. On the kitchen table sat a single manila envelope. No one was there to greet him. He opened it. Inside were 4 photographs. Marcus Halverson, Elena Torres, Jonah Pike, and David Hunter. Each photo had a date scrawled in black marker. 3 of them were crossed out. The 4th date, the one under his name, was next week. Back at his apartment, David spread the photos on the table, studying them. These weren't accidents. This was a methodical purge. He pulled up the hidden archives again, this time digging into any operational links between the victims. The deeper he went, the more the picture sharpened. All of them had been part of the same covert directive during their active Echo years, Directive 14. The operation had involved destabilizing a mid-tier weapons trafficking network in Eastern Europe. The leader of that network had slipped away before the collapse. Vincent Castellano. David closed his eyes. It always came back to Castellano. That night, sitting in the glow of his laptop, David found the last piece. An internal OE memorandum, heavily encrypted, but not enough to keep him out. It was a recruitment and deployment order under Project Hearthstone, signed and dated 9 years ago. Target: Hunter David. Asset assigned: Linda Carver Hunter. Objective: infiltrate domestic environment. Establish psychological dependency. Await directive clearance for termination. David read it 3 times, the words burning into his mind. His marriage hadn't been real. His life since walking away from Echo 77 hadn't been real. It had all been a setup from the start. And in that moment, sitting in a room that suddenly felt smaller than a coffin, David realized he wasn't dealing with betrayal anymore. He was dealing with a program designed to erase men like him from existence. And Linda had been there from day one, playing the long game. Chapter 6, the steel mill showdown. The phone rang just past midnight. David had been sitting at his kitchen table, dismantling and cleaning the SIG sour he hadn't touched in years. The caller ID said unknown number, but the voice that came through was one he could never mistake. David, Linda's tone was soft, almost trembling. I made a mistake. I just want to talk. Please. He said nothing. There's a place, she continued quickly, the old Harrington steel mill. No one will bother us there. Just meet me. One last time. David let the silence stretch until she almost hung up. What makes you think I'd walk into that? Because deep down, you still love me, she whispered, and then the line went dead. David sat there for a long moment, staring at the quiet phone. Her words didn't sting. They confirmed what he'd already suspected. If she was calling, it meant Castellano's network had decided to stop playing the long game. Tonight wasn't about reconciliation. Tonight was about cleaning up a loose end. He reached into the closet and pulled out a black duffel bag. Inside, the tools of his former life lay waiting like old friends. Plastic explosives, det cord, remote detonators, a collapsible grappling hook, and 2 extra magazines. By the time he reached the Harrington steel mill, the sky was a deep ink blue, the moon barely a sliver. The place was a rusting skeleton, its smokestacks leaning like tired giants. Broken windows stared like empty eyes over the cracked parking lot. David killed his headlights 100 yards out and walked the rest of the way. Boots silent on the gravel. Every step measured. Inside, the air smelled of rust and oil. His breath misted in the cold. Rats skittered across the floor as he moved deeper into the maze of steel beams and catwalks. Before meeting anyone, he went to work. He placed the first charge on a load-bearing column in the northwest section. The second went on an overhead crane rail, its massive steel hook suspended above the floor. The third, near the old furnace supports, its weight enough to crush anything beneath if the beam gave way. David didn't plan to use all of them, but contingencies kept him alive. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the mill. David, Linda's voice floated through the dark. She stood under a lone hanging lamp, her hands folded, looking like the same woman he'd once trusted with everything. You came, she said, taking a hesitant step forward. He stayed in the shadows. You didn't come here alone. Her lips twitched, just enough for him to catch it. They promised they'd let you walk away if you just listened. David's eyes flicked upward. Catwalks. Movement. Glints of rifle scopes in the dark. The first muzzle flash bloomed before Linda could speak again. David dove behind a rusted machine press, rounds sparking off steel around him. The sound was deafening, ricochets screaming like angry hornets. He pulled the SIG, counted the angles. 3 shooters on the catwalk, at least 2 more on the ground, closing in from the shadows. They thought they had him cornered. David hit the first detonator. A boom ripped through the northwest corner of the mill. The load-bearing column buckled, sending a section of catwalk crashing down. One of the riflemen screamed as twisted steel swallowed him. Gunfire erupted from the survivors, wild and frantic. David rolled from cover, firing 2 clean shots, one center mass, one to drop a rifle before it could swing toward him. Linda was shouting something, but he tuned her out. This was math now, angles, timing, momentum. A shooter on the ground flanked right, firing from behind a forklift. David ducked left, weaving between stacks of old steel sheets. Bullets clanged off the metal, sparks dancing in the dark. He popped up just long enough to send a round through the man's shoulder, dropping him with a cry. The catwalk above groaned under shifting weight. David thumbed the second detonator. The overhead crane rail exploded in a shower of sparks, the massive hook swinging free. Gravity did the rest. It crashed down like a hammer, obliterating the last rifleman above and twisting the walkway into a jagged ruin. That left 2. One came charging from the shadows, firing on the move. David let him close the gap, sidestepped to the last second, and drove the butt of his pistol into the man's jaw. He went down hard, the gun skittering across the floor. The last shooter, taller, heavier, stood between David and Linda, weapon up. You're done, old man, the thug sneered. David smiled coldly and pressed the final detonator. The furnace supports gave way with a tortured groan, and a rain of steel beams crashed down between them. The man didn't even have time to scream. When the dust settled, Linda was frozen under the hanging lamp, her eyes wide. Behind her, the bodies of Castellano's men lay sprawled in twisted wreckage. "You never trusted me," she said, her voice barely audible over the creak of settling metal. "I trusted you exactly as much as you trusted me," David replied, holstering his weapon. "Which is why I'm still breathing." She took a step toward him, but the crunch of distant tires on gravel made them both look toward the far bay doors. David didn't need to see the vehicles to know Castellano's network would be feeling this hit. This wasn't just a failed kill. It was a bloodletting. Without another word, David melted into the shadows, leaving Linda under the swaying lamp. The night air outside was sharp, but it carried something he hadn't felt in a long time. The first real blow had been struck, and Castellano's network had just taken a massive hit. Chapter 7: Blood in the Shadows. The Harrington Steel Mill massacre made headlines the next morning, though the truth was buried under layers of convenient lies. The paper spoke of a gang-related shootout in an abandoned building, the details hazy, the victims unnamed. But David didn't need a byline to know what had happened afterward. Word spread in the underworld fast. Linda and Ryan had survived the collapse, but left the scene battered, bleeding, and humiliated. They'd been scooped up by the police not long after, the remnants of their cover stories in shreds. Hospital room 314. 2 days later, Linda sat upright in bed, bruises blooming across her face, her arm in a sling. Ryan was in the bed opposite, a halo of bandages around his head. "You ruined everything," she hissed at him. "Me? You're the one who froze. You should have kept him talking." Ryan's voice was raspy from a partially collapsed lung. "We had the perfect setup. Castellano doesn't give second chances." The door opened, and 2 uniformed guards stepped in. "Visiting hours," one of them said flatly. The man who entered was lean, wearing an expensive charcoal suit, sunglasses indoors. His smile was warm enough to be unsettling. "Linda." "Ryan." He closed the door behind him. "The boss sends his condolences." Ryan frowned. "Tell him we can still." The silence cut him short, a neat hole opening in his forehead before his body slumped sideways. Linda's gasp was strangled into silence as the man crossed the room in 2 calm strides, pressing the barrel under her chin. "You were never supposed to survive the mill," he whispered. "The mess you've made costs more than you're worth." Her last breath was a trembling exhale. Another muffled shot, and her body slid back against the pillows. The suited man tucked the weapon away, straightened his jacket, and walked out past the stunned guards without a backward glance. David heard about it less than 12 hours later. He was in his garage, cleaning the carbon from his rifle's bolt carrier, when an encrypted line on his burner phone buzzed. 2 birds down, the voice on the other end said. "No name, no greeting, just the facts. Vincent cleaned house." David set the rifle aside. "So he thinks it ends there." There was a pause. "No, he's put a price on your head. 2 million. No borders, no rules." David didn't speak for several seconds. 2 million meant every contract killer, ex-military drifter, and thrill-seeking amateur would crawl out of the shadows. And they'd come in waves. The first wave came that same night. It started with the power going out at 1:14 a.m. Not a neighborhood outage, just his house. The streetlights outside still glowed. David rolled out of bed, the blackout goggles already in his hands. A faint clink came from the back door, followed by the soft creak of hinges. He moved through the dark like a shadow, pistol drawn. 2 men slipped inside, rifles raised, eyes adjusting. Their steps were too careful, their gear too clean. Not amateurs. David waited until they crossed the threshold into the kitchen before squeezing off 2 suppressed shots. Both went down silently, their bodies hitting tile. The thud of boots on the front porch told him there were more. He vaulted over the counter, slipped into the hallway, and crouched behind the staircase just as the front door exploded inward. Splinters flew, and 3 figures stormed in, black combat rigs, laser sights sweeping. David flicked the switch on the strobe device planted in the corner. A blinding pulse lit the entryway, disorienting them just long enough for him to fire 4 rapid rounds. 2 went down instantly. The third staggered into the wall, clutching a bleeding thigh. David moved in, twisting the man's rifle away before driving an elbow into his temple. The hitman collapsed, unconscious. The quiet after the initial breach didn't last. A sudden thump, thump, thump from outside rattled the windows. Smoke canisters. The living room filled with thick white haze, swallowing the furniture whole. David switched to thermal mode. Through the swirling fog, he counted 3 more heat signatures moving along the side of the house. One paused to plant something against the siding. Breaching charge. He fired through the wall without hesitation. The figure crumpled, heat signature flickering out. The other 2 ducked low, firing blindly into the smoke, their rounds shredding the couch and picture frames. David slid along the wall, came around behind them through the open patio door, and dropped them with 2 quick headshots. Somewhere outside, an engine roared to life. Headlights flared through the smoke. A black SUV tore up the driveway, its side door sliding open mid-roll. A man inside leveled a shotgun at the front window. David dove sideways as the blast shredded the wall where he'd been standing. He came up kneeling, rifle raised, and put a round through the driver's side. The SUV swerved, smashed into the retaining wall, and stopped dead. The shooter inside tried to crawl out, but David was already there, yanking him to the ground and slamming his head against the gravel until the fight went out of him. Silence. The only sound were David's steady breathing and the faint hiss of cooling metal from the SUV's engine. 8 men in total, all down. He moved through the house, checking each room, making sure none had slipped through the cracks. The kitchen floor was a mess of blood and shell casings. The living room looked like a war zone. David pulled the bodies into a single pile in the driveway, stripped them of weapons, and dumped the gear into his garage. He knew better than to call the police. Castellano's money bought silence, and local law enforcement was already half in his pocket. Standing over the heap of would-be killers, David felt no triumph, only the clarity of what came next. Vincent's remaining network had sent a message, and David had just sent one back. The bounty was still active. The next team would come soon, but now they'd know the truth. The man they were hunting wasn't just a target. He was the one thing you didn't want in your crosshairs. Chapter 8. The Web of Power. The night after the siege, David sat in the dim glow of 3 monitors in his basement. The room smelled faintly of gun, oil, and hot circuitry. The house upstairs still bore the scars of the attack, but David wasn't patching drywall tonight. He was digging. The bounty didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone with influence, money, and the right kind of connections had to authorize it. And if there was one thing David had learned in Echo, it was this. Follow the money, follow the motive, find the puppeteer. Lines of encrypted data scrolled down his central screen, intercepted chatter from dark web bounty boards and closed mercenary forums. He'd already cracked 2 layers of VPN relays from an offshore escrow account. The third was proving stubborn. David's fingers tapped a rapid rhythm on the keyboard, his eyes locked on a string of numbers that didn't belong. Anomaly detection had been second nature to him in the field. This one was too precise to be random, a manual injection into the account's transaction history. A final keystroke. The account unraveled. A name surfaced first. Darren House, CEO of Meridian Systems Defense. Publicly, House was a billionaire defense contractor known for patriotic innovation in weapons systems. Privately, David knew he'd made his fortune selling destabilization as a product to the highest bidder. But Darren wasn't working alone. The payment chain linked directly to a PAC bankrolled by Senator Brian Gaines, the same Gaines who had sat on the Intelligence Oversight Committee. Gaines's speeches were all about protecting American interests. David saw it for what it was, protecting his own portfolio of dirty secrets. The final layer led to a name David hadn't heard in years. Lon McLaughlin, CIA analyst. In Echo, they'd called him the accountant, the man who managed operational culling lists. And now, apparently, bounties. David leaned back, rubbing his jaw. 3 names, 3 power centers, corporate, political, intelligence braided together. This wasn't just about him. It was about Echo. The same covert family that had trained him, and then, one by one, quietly erased those like him. That night, David ghosted through secure channels, fishing for McLaughlin's digital shadow. He found it buried under multiple identities, all running through Langley subnets. A simple hack wouldn't work. McLaughlin was no amateur. So David went old school. 2 nights later, he waited across the street from a dull-looking townhouse in Arlington, Virginia. McLaughlin emerged at 9:37 p.m., coffee in hand, heading for his Tesla. David followed on foot, close enough to see the man's reflection in glass, but far enough to stay invisible in the crowd. When McLaughlin reached the underground parking structure, David stepped from the shadows. Evening lawn. McLaughlin froze. His eyes darted to the side, calculating escape routes. "David Harper." Surprised, David said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. "I heard you died in Veracruz." "You heard wrong." David took a step closer. "We need to talk." McLaughlin's shoulders tensed. "If this is about the bounty, it's not about it," David cut in. "It's about who signed off. You were always the numbers man. You don't pull a trigger unless someone tells you where and when." McLaughlin's gaze flickered to the security camera above the entrance. "Not here." Inside McLaughlin's apartment, the analyst paced like a cornered animal. "You know the kind of people you're poking at," McLaughlin said. "House Gaines, they're untouchable." David remained still, hands in his jacket pockets. "Nobody's untouchable." McLaughlin stopped pacing. "They gave me a list. 24 names. All Echo. 23 of them are already dead. You were supposed to be number 24. David's jaw clenched. "Linda, Ryan, the steel mill. House paid for the op," McLaughlin said. "Gaines provided political cover in case anything spilled into the press. My job was to keep the roster updated. Make sure the cleaners knew where to find the next target." "Why?" David asked. McLaughlin hesitated. "They're calling it Project Phoenix. House wants to corner the market on certain black contracts. Echo operatives are inconvenient. Too much loyalty to the wrong people. And you went along with it." McLaughlin looked away. "You don't say no to them, David. Not, and keep breathing." David stepped forward until he was inches from McLaughlin's face. "Then you'd better start talking if you want to keep doing either." For the next 2 hours, McLaughlin talked. He gave names, dates, and operational details. He confirmed that Echo had been systematically dismantled, hit squads, accidents, falsified obituaries. Some were taken out overseas under the cover of insurgent attacks. Others, like David, were marked for domestic elimination. David recorded everything. Every name, every timestamp. By 2 a.m., McLaughlin slumped into a chair, looking 20 years older. "That's all I have." David pocketed the recorder. "It's enough." "Enough for what?" David paused at the door. "To end this." Back in his safe house, David cross-referenced McLaughlin's intel with his own files. 23 operatives dead. Not just soldiers, specialists. Snipers, infiltrators, demolitions experts. The kind of people who could tilt the balance of a war without anyone knowing they'd been there. And now, only one remained. Him. The information McLaughlin gave also included something unexpected, an internal memo Darren House had sent to his board of directors. In it, House mentioned a victory celebration planned at Meridian Systems HQ. The memo was laced with corporate jargon, but the meaning was clear. They thought the operation was over. David sat back in his chair, eyes on the screen. Meridian HQ was in D.C., a fortress of glass and steel with private security on par with military units. If they were celebrating there, it meant all 3, House, Gaines, and McLaughlin's allies, would be in the same place. For the first time since the steel mill, David felt the faint stirrings of a plan forming. A dangerous one, and he intended to be there when they raised their glasses. Chapter 9, The Tower Falls. David stood at the base of Meridian Systems' towering headquarters, the glass monolith piercing the dusk sky like a blade. 53 names, board members, lobbyists, politicians, intelligence operatives, all gathered inside to toast their ruthless conquest. Tonight, they celebrated a victory built on blood and betrayal. But David had other plans. His reflection flickered in the lobby's polished marble as he passed the security checkpoint. A forged biometric ID and a confident stride let him slip through without a second glance. The usual metal detectors were bypassed by an insider's override code, and he felt the familiar surge of adrenaline only a mission of this scale could bring. Inside, the air was crisp and cool, scented faintly with fresh coffee and expensive cologne. Crystal glasses clinked in the vast conference hall, and laughter echoed off the steel walls. David's gaze swept the crowd. There was Darren House, charismatic as ever, raising a glass with Senator Brian Gaines. Across the room, Lon McLaughlin whispered in the ear of a stern-looking woman David recognized from intelligence briefings. 53 of the most dangerous people David had ever encountered, all under one roof. He moved quickly and silently, slipping behind the catering carts and ducking under tables. His earpiece crackled softly with updates from his remote surveillance. Security patrol routes, camera blind spots, door lock schedules. Every step was choreographed to perfection. In the control room, he plugged a small device into the building's network panel, a custom virus designed to seize control of the ventilation and security systems. His fingers danced over the keypad, overriding manual controls. Slowly, the halon gas release system was armed. The inert gas that would suffocate them silently if triggered, their only escape of forced confession. David's voice came through the building's PA system, calm but unyielding. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're now my guests. The building is sealed. Any attempt to escape will trigger the release of halon gas throughout this floor. You will either confess the truth willingly, or I will ensure you pay the price." A stunned silence fell. Murmurs rippled as the conspirators realized their predicament. Darren House was the first to speak, his voice sharp but controlled. "You're bluffing. No one knows you're here." David's response was a chilling calm. "I'm already uploading every word. Every file, every transaction tied to this room is being backed up to multiple secure servers worldwide. You have 10 minutes to comply." The tension twisted tighter. One of the senior executives gasped, clutching her pearls. "Confessions? You can't be serious." David's voice cut through. "I'm dead serious. Start confessing now, or this building becomes your tomb." The room shifted, eyes flicking nervously to one another. Slowly, phones came out. Each key player began reading off their prepared statements. Forced admissions of bribery, assassination orders, covert operations, and racketeering. David monitored the uploads, watching the progress bars crawl across his screen. Minutes passed like hours. Then, as the last confession sealed, he triggered the building's emergency systems, unlocking doors, cutting power to non-essential systems, and activating the explosives he'd planted hours ago in critical structural joints. Outside, the first tremors vibrated the pavement. Inside, panic blossomed. People surged for exits, but David's carefully timed partial collapse sealed them off. A massive section of the tower's facade crumbled inward, glass and steel cascading down onto the plaza below with a thunderous roar. Dust clouded the air as alarms screamed. Emergency lights flickered on, revealing the chaos. But David was already gone, slipping through a service tunnel before the security teams could mobilize. In the aftermath, the media exploded with the leaked confessions. The once invincible network was exposed, their power shattered like the building itself. David watched the news reports quietly, knowing this was just the beginning. The network's foundation had cracked, and justice would no longer be buried in shadow. The tower had fallen. Chapter 10: War Without End. Months had slipped past since the collapse of Meridian Systems' towering headquarters and the public unraveling of the web of corruption. The fallout reshaped power structures overnight. Yet in the shadows, a new hunt began. David Matthysse sat alone in a dimly lit safe house on the outskirts of the city. The hum of a small fan barely cut through the silence. His eyes scanned the encrypted digital map projected on the table before him. 3 names blinked red on the screen: Viola Donovan, Colonel Will Ellis, and Senator Ted Ingram. 3 ghosts. A soft knock at the door broke the quiet. David didn't look up. The door opened, and a lean figure slipped inside, Santiago Meyer, his oldest contact and one of the few remaining Echo operatives still alive. Got fresh intel on Donovan, Santiago said, dropping a file on the table. She's laying low in Miami, corporate boardroom by day, cartel liaison by night. A ghost with a killer smile. David nodded without speaking, eyes still fixed on the glowing names. Ellis is in D.C., he murmured. Officially retired. Unofficially still pulling strings in the military-industrial complex. And Ingram, Santiago added, pulling up a dossier on the tablet, is playing both sides. Senate hearings by day, arms broker at midnight. David's jaw tightened. All three knew how to survive the fall. But they're exposed now. Exposed, Santiago repeated with a grim smile, means we have them in our sights. The room darkened as the late afternoon sun sank behind the city skyline. Outside, life carried on unaware of the quiet war being waged. David rose and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. His reflection stared back, a man weathered by betrayal, hardened by loss, but unbroken. This isn't revenge anymore, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. It's dismantling the system that betrayed us all. Santiago stepped beside him. You think the others will come out of hiding? David shook his head. They'll come when the system shows its weakness. And we'll be ready. Over the coming weeks, David and the scattered remnants of Echo moved like ghosts themselves, coordinating surveillance, intercepting communications, and cutting supply lines. Each target's network began to unravel, a whispered phone call here, a frozen bank account there. One evening, David sat with a handful of operatives around a battered table deep in a safe house bunker. Viola, Donovan, Ellis, and Ingram were becoming shadows in their hunting ground. But Echo operatives were patient. We take them one by one, David instructed, eyes sweeping the faces of his allies. No mistakes, no mercy. A younger operative spoke up, voice steady but cautious. What if they fight back? They're powerful. David's gaze sharpened. They've already shown what they are. Now it's our turn. The mission evolved from raw vengeance into something colder, more precise, justice as surgical as the operations that had trained them. The lines between hunter and hunted blurred as each step tightened the noose around the last conspirators. But David never let the darkness consume him. His mind replayed Linda's face, betrayal carved deep, but it fueled a mission beyond personal loss. He was fighting for all Echo who never got a chance. For every ghost erased without a name. Weeks turned into months. Small victories mounted. Donovan's assets seized, Ellis's military contracts cut, Ingram's political allies turned against him. And still, the trio remained elusive. One rainy night, David stood on the rooftop of an abandoned building, watching the city below pulse with life. The glow of streetlights mirrored the stars, but his heart was anchored in the shadows. This war, he said softly, voice carried away by the wind, will never truly end. But every piece we take down is a step closer. Santiago joined him, lighting a cigarette, the smoke curling upward. Ready for the next move? Santiago asked. David nodded, eyes steely. Always. The closing scene found David disappearing once again into the city's labyrinthine alleys, a man cloaked by the night. No longer just a victim or a fighter, but a force determined to dismantle the system from within. The war was no longer about revenge. It was about breaking the cycle that had claimed so many lives. And David Matthysse was ready to see it through, no matter the cost.